Welcome to High Ground. My name is Tanner, and today I'm going to be doing a recap of the 2022 season's third stage for Rainbow Six Siege's Pro Circuit, however you would call it. I'm going to talk about all of the major regions except for APAC. So we saw the first two play days, the first weekend of games for Brazil, which is the Tier 1 league in LATAM. And there's actually games ongoing now, so I'm going to try to exclude showing them, and we'll talk about them next week, but it makes things a little bit complicated for what I'm doing here. And then we have another game for Europe, and we have two more games for NA. I'm just sort of gonna go through LATAM and EU pretty quickly, mostly to focus on NA, but we'll talk about them. Okay, let's get down to it. FaZe take down W7M just like they did at the major, and it's a close game, 8-6. FaZe start out with a win, W7M at least start out with a point. Liquid take down NiP in another close game, but the full 3 points for Liquid, no points for NiP. Black Dragons take down Tropic House, a new org to the scene, taking over the INTZ roster, and also a few changes on that roster. Black Dragons get off to a hot start. They win here, and they win on the second day, and actually, spoilers, they win on the third day. They're undefeated, haven't lost a point just yet. And last stage, I think they were pretty good as well, and they only choked going to the major towards the end of the stage. They were like in a major position for most of the stage, and then they let it slip. So probably they're going to try to avoid doing that at this stage. Team 1 takes down Double O Nation, and you'd almost think a little bit of a rivalry here because a lot of the Team 1 players went to Double O Nation, but there are now none of the original Team 1 members from the Mexico major winning squad. Lagonis is now on Liquid, Alamao's on G2, the other three players on Double O Nation. So, but still, it is Team 1 taking down Nation over there. And then Furia losing in round 15 to MIBR, so a decent start for MIBR, a little bit of a heartbreaker for Furia. And then in day number 2, we have Team 1 taking down Tropic House, so another close-ish game, another round 12 game. So Team 1 in both games a single round away from going to overtime, but no, they have the full 6 points after 2 days. W7M takes down Furia, so another overtime game for W7M, but they do win it. So 3 of the 6 possible points it's an okay start. You know, maybe they would have liked to get off to a better start, seeing as though they are the back-to-back first place teams for the regular stage for Brazil in stages 1 and 2. But okay, you know, they're only missing 3 points. There's a lot of games to be played. Another heartbreaker for Furia. They have 2 points after playing 30 rounds. So, you know, losing in round 15 again. That's tough, but I mean, they're going pretty tight against 2 pretty decent teams. So maybe that bodes well for them going forward. MIBR losing to Ninjas in Pajamas. So 3 out of 6 points for NiP as well. No overtime for them though. Black Dragons takes down Liquid. And so we'll see if Liquid bounce back. Again, it's just one loss there. They have 3 out of 6 points as well. And Black Dragons, they seem pretty good. You know, they did miss the major, but again, they sort of, that's definitely their own fault. They let it slip. And Liquid still probably establishing their new system with Lagonis coming in as, I think, the IGL, and then so Ask goes away from the hard support role. Okay, you know, all this stuff going on. And then we have the biggest beatdown of the stage so far. We haven't seen any 7-0s, 7-2, 7-3s, and here's a 7-1 FaZe over Double O Nation. So I'm not actually going to show the standings here because they're updating for day number 3, which is ongoing. So, you know, it is what it is. I showed you the results, but the standings are like, I mean, I sort of mentioned how many points each team has, but like Black Dragons is at the top, and along with Team 1, and then there's several teams on 3 points, and okay, so on and so forth, but we're not going to really go over that. Let's go to Europe now. So, okay, we already talked about these games, so we'll maybe reference them to establish some trends, but let's talk about the second play day, which happened on the 19th. This was, I mean, close to a week ago. It's already the 24th that I'm recording this. Outsiders beat M&M. It seems like these are both going to be middle table teams, maybe fighting to break into the top 4. Do keep in mind M&M was in top 4 last stage. They went to the major, but they were the worst performing European team at that major. Outsiders making a couple roster changes, bringing in some old Empire players. Seems to be working out for them. They did get kind of crushed by Wolves on the first day, but Wolves were the best team last stage, so I think that's fine enough. And then Rogue takes down TT9, so bounce back from Rogue. They lost to Na'Vi. They did get the 1 point, but you know, you probably don't want to be losing to TT9. They still seem to be the worst team in the league, but at least they're keeping it kind of close. They lose 4-7 here, and they lose 5-7 here to both teams that were at the major, so maybe they can get something going forward from here. BDS beat Wolves, so in the battle of the French squads, it is BDS that comes out on top. I think a lot of people were anticipating BDS to be really good this stage. They missed out on the major last stage, which isn't something that very often happens to them. They bring in, again, is it Leakafac, Likefac, EFAC, however you want to call him. Just a really prolific gunner, and he's been very good in his 2 first games, one of the highest rated players in the league. And I think this is even a little bit of a comeback, if I remember right. Wolves were up by a decent amount. BDS come back to win it in overtime, 8-6, and yeah, it's got to feel good to beat the other French team that was the top team in the league last stage. G2 losing to Secret, so I mean, Secret's probably one of the last teams you want to be losing to, and it seems like G2 is get off to a really poor start like they did last stage, maybe they'll make the miracle comeback again. But I mean, if you go down 0-3 again, like, I mean, what are the odds you do it twice, really? They have 1 point on the board, but that's obviously not fantastic. And then Heroic tapes down Na'Vi. So Heroic is one of the top teams at the moment. It wasn't clear if they would be good or not. They were, they were okay last stage, but they were really good in stage 1. So maybe they're returning to form. A couple new players on the squad, making this almost sort of like a new team, especially with pretty much all of their legacy players being gone except for Grizzly. So let's take a look at how the standings are looking for Europe at the moment. Yeah, Heroic and BDS, the top 2 teams. So Heroic, the top team in stage 1, and then BDS, certainly the top team from last year, if you add everything up. And, well, I mean, unless, Empire was the highest placing European team at SI, and BDS didn't do well. But if you just look at the league, I think BDS, right? And then Wolves and Rogue, the 2 top seeds from last stage. And of course, Rogue, the major winners. Wolves made it to playoffs, but yeah, Wolves were first. Rogue was second in Europe last stage. And then we have M&M, Na'Vi, Outsiders all on 3 points. So at the moment, it looks like these are maybe the teams that will be fighting to take a spot from one of these 4. But of course, they can very easily take a spot. If one of these teams wins and one of these teams doesn't win, I mean, they'll just simply pass them, okay? And then we have Secret, G2, and TT9 at the bottom. G2, everybody knows they have the talent. They did it last stage. Maybe they'll make a comeback. But for now, they are a bottom-ranked team as far as the standings go. Team Secret, well, I mean, we'll see if they can climb out of here. And same sort of thing for TT9. No points just yet, and they've been the worst team in the league all year. Will they continue to be? I mean, it looks like it, but who knows? Okay, let's go on to NA now. First game we're going to talk about out of 10 games, so let's try to run these fairly quickly. Sonics versus XSET, and I thought this was going to be maybe one of the tightest games, or at least the most exciting games of this playday. It ends up being a blowout. This is the worst loss this XSET roster has ever suffered in the NAL. They've never gotten fewer than 3 rounds. They've gotten fewer than 3 rounds in I think once in each major, but again, just talking about NAL, that's never happened. This is their most definitive loss, their most decisive loss, I should say. And yeah, Sonics look pretty good after this performance. A clubhouse game, which is traditionally a pretty good map for each of these teams. Sonics sort of a newish roster, but Rex and Grixer, Kansan still around. And then, yeah, XSET, I think, are generally pretty good on this map, but not in this game. So let's take a look at the stats. It's only Spirits doing it all well on XSET, everybody getting crushed. You don't usually see Diaz and Gomez, or excuse me, Diaz and Yaga doing this poorly. Usually, maybe they'll have a slightly lackluster game, but they are usually just always performing. And then it's Gomez and Spirits usually with maybe a really good game or a really bad game. And then Kino is usually fairly consistent, but he has his own bad games. Well, I mean, what can you do when you're playing the hard breach smoke roll? It's just going to happen sometimes. But on the other hand, Sonics, Geo on top, and Gunner a bounce back game certainly, or I guess not a bounce back game because he had his bounce back game in their game against Dark Zero. So a poor game in the first game, and then 2 good games coming out from Gunner. And then, of course, you love to see your support player getting to shine. 9-3, 3 plants. Yeah, just from fantastic performance by him. And then Grixer and Rexen putting up numbers as they generally do. And then Kansan a little bit lackluster, but whatever. I mean, you smoke the other team. I don't think anybody's really going to complain about it. So let's go on to the next game. We have Space Station versus Parabellum. Parabellum coming into this hot. They hadn't dropped a single point, but they've only played on border. I did say, and maybe a little bit uninformed to say this, that I didn't think anybody was going to take them to border. I hadn't watched their games like close enough to be like, oh yeah, they're just that good. I mean, they were certainly winning rounds, and they did it against good teams. Although, well, auction, maybe it's questionable how good they are at the moment. SSG did notice some weaknesses in Parabellum's play, or at least patterns, if nothing else, and they took them to border and they took them down pretty handily. So Parabellum, as they have been in their entire time in the NAL, they have their moments. But they seem to be a flash in the pan at any given time. They're 2-2 after this week. I guess a little bit of a spoiler for the next game, but you're probably already aware of how most of the games went down. Yeah, they're going to have to bounce back a little bit because going from flawless first week to worst possible second week is obviously a big dip in performance and momentum. But yeah, good on Space Station to do what they did here. Taking a look at the stats, Bosco with a pop-off game, and you don't see this from him too much anymore since he's gone over to the hard support IGL role. A couple of plants. I think last time they played on, maybe it wasn't the last time they played on border, when they played against Sonics last stage on border, Bosco had 5 plants and so did Super, one of the plantingest games ever. But a couple of plants and then a lot of frags coming out from Bosco. Top frag in the lobby, in fact. So always love to see it. And Rampy and Foltz having quite good games as well. And then Yeti and Hot and Cold, a little bit more modest, but still perfectly fine score lines. And then over on Parabellum, Blaz continues to be the best player on Parabellum statistically, and everyone else kind of getting smoked 5-8, 5-8, 5-8. And then Asian 3-9 is especially brutal. So we'll have to see Parabellum on some other maps going forward, and we will talk about them on another map for the next playday. But not looking especially good at the moment, but still, we have over half of the stage to play out. Let's take a look at the next game. Astralis versus TSM. So TSM coming into this one especially hot if you just looked at the numbers. So they'd only dropped like 4 rounds or something, like 3 or 4, whatever it was, like only a handful of rounds, but they played against Mirage, they played against Beast Coast. I want to say it was 3 rounds against Mirage, 1 round against Beast Coast is what they dropped. But coming into the stage, those looked like the 2 worst teams, so we were definitely going to have to see TSM play against some other teams. At the moment, Mirage looked pretty good, and Beast Coast, we'll also talk about them. But Astralis do take it down, 7-4, play on Cafe, especially weird. Astralis generally was not a very good Cafe team in the past, and TSM was very good on Cafe, so really flipping the script in this game. And the stats, yeah, stats don't, well, I mean, stats can lie, actually, especially in a game like Siege. There are lots of things that won't improve your stats that definitely contribute to winning. Forest is a monster, and, well, you see it in this game, but you'll see it even more in the next game. He gets twice as many kills as he does here. 11-5 is obviously very impressive. Forest just gets kills. He just gets things done, even though this guy is playing Havana and Castle. Nobody knows how he does it. He just does it. And DP Fire, definitely a statement comeback after his last performance. I think it was just the previous game he went 1-10. And 9-8 is not like amazing, but obviously the second highest rated player on his team. He had an ace, so his kills were definitely tied to 1 round mostly. They played 11 rounds, and in 5 of his 9 kills came in 1 of those 11, so do keep that in mind. And Iconic going 10-10, J90 and Shuttle, not fantastic, but they do still get the full 3 points. I'm sure they're happy enough with that fact. Snake continues to be pretty good, 3-1 on the entry, +2 on the KD, and the tied for the second highest fragger in the lobby is still pretty solid. Achieved having a good game, Merc and Gasher as well, but this is the difference maker. Bolo has a terrible game, and I think he's been really good in all the other games he's played, but obviously, this is what cost them, because just looking at the stats, if Bolo was a little bit better, you'd be very surprised to see that this was the team that lost. And yeah, I mean, Bolo goes like 7-9, maybe they won, who knows? But okay, yeah, brutal in that regard. And this maybe speaks to Bolo just not caring enough. He's obviously like one of the most skilled players in the world when he's actually on, but does he just not put in the work to actually be consistently on against good teams? Because again, they smoked Beast Coast, they smoked Mirage. I think Bolo had good games in each of them, but now they're playing against Astralis, the first place team from stages 1 and 2, and Bolo gets crushed. But that trend does get bucked a little bit in the next game, so we'll see that in a minute. And let's continue on. Dark Zero versus Beast Coast, 4th game, I believe, for the first playday number 3. Sky's coming in for Hyper, so Sky's returns to Dark Zero. It's been like over a year, but it doesn't feel that long. And yeah, Hyper, just motivation issues, didn't want to continue playing, maybe some other factors as well. We'll see if he does come back. It sort of sounds like he is just going to be replaced, maybe not permanently by Skies. They are looking for a permanent replacement, but Skies has been good so far, so we'll see. Playing against Beast Coast, the worst team pretty much coming into this game, and not all through fault of their own, and maybe they will be the worst team still when Ferda shows up, but for now, until they get to play with Ferda, it's not really a super fair judgment to make. And, some rounds in this game were pretty close. They probably could have gone Beast Coast's way, but some players on Dark Zero, particularly Pambazu, were not ready to let these things slip. And I think it was the very last round. It was like a 2v5. I think it was Panda and Eclipse versus, well, all 5 members of Beast Coast. Pamba gets a big 4K and seals out the game 7-4. So another Clubhouse game. Seen a decent amount of Clubhouse this stage thus far. And looking at the stats, yeah, Pamba goes big, massive. Sky's doing well as well, and on the knock and alibi. So they're probably just sort of putting them on the quote-unquote easiest roles to play, but maybe just the least restrictive roles, so that he can sort of have his own freedom. Doesn't have to adhere to the strat and what everyone else is doing as much as the other players, who probably have a better understanding because they've been on the team longer. Canadian, pretty brutal game on his famed Clubhouse, but still they get the W. And then Surf having a good game, which he normally does. He's been impressive. Maybe stat padding, maybe not. I mean, up to your decision, or, well, it's probably somewhat objective if you actually pay attention, but okay, we won't make those judgments just yet. Zeno having a good game as well. Nice to see. Slash, Anthony, and Mark, yeah, pretty brutal. Anthony continues to have really bad stats, and then Slash and Mark, yeah, it is what it is. And a couple more 5/8s to join the 3 Parabellum members that dropped 5/8. So yeah, maybe it's looking a little bit okay for Beast Coast in that if a few fewer mistakes and they could have maybe pushed overtime or even won this game. But that's also against a Dark Zero that just had to replace one of their players. So, you know, we'll talk about Beast Coast again in the next playday. Let's go on to the next playday. No, excuse me. Final game, and then we'll go to the next playday. Oxygen versus Mirage. So this is maybe not the final nail in the coffin exactly for Oxygen, but when you lose to Mirage, it just feels really bad. But that's mostly because Mirage was so bad before. They're not actually bad now. I guess they're actually good. And Oxygen is not good. So people continue to question Sweater coming in for Laxing, and we'll see if they bounce back. But, well, spoiler for the next game, they lose that one as well. They have like 1 point in 4 games. There's like no chance they're going to the major, and probably even after this loss, it was very unrealistic for them to go to the major. And Mirage looking hot, so they play on Theme Park. So Mirage allowed to go to Theme Park again. They were 1-1 on it, so it's maybe not the exact same case as when SSG took Parabellum to Border, because Parabellum was 2-0 on Border. Okay, but this puts Mirage at 2-1 on Border for the stage. And taking a look at how things went, Newers, you know, a good number of kills, but maybe some of them weren't the most impactful, and then nobody else getting, well, even that many kills, not very highly rated. And then on Mirage, yeah, Kento goes nuke, which is really nice to see. I mean, maybe not nuke. 13-8 is obviously very good. 82% cost, fantastic. He had a pretty bad first week. I want to say he was the lowest rated player in both games, at least in one. I don't think he had a good game in either of them, especially. But okay, you know, top rated player here really put them over the line against Oxygen. And then Mohesi continues to be very impressive on the Thermite Smoke. 2 plants, 9 and 6, looking pretty good. 3 and 1 on the entry. Weird that he has the most entries out of everybody, but okay. And then we have Melted, Benji, Dexter. So I mean, Dexter going -1, but everybody else in -1. Everybody else going even or positive on both kill stats. So yeah, Mirage looking pretty good, especially on Theme Park, but we'll see them on non-Theme Park in the next game. We'll talk about it. Okay, let's move on. We have Dark Zero versus Parabellum to kick off playday number 4 for the NAL, and I felt like this was even-ish. Parabellum, they definitely lost their momentum by losing to SSG as hard as they did. They definitely got figured out on that map, and I really didn't think they were going to go to Border again. They were close. Dark Zero could have probably let them go there. I don't think Parabellum was going to pick Theme Park over Border, but I guess I don't know that for certain. And okay, so Dark Zero, I think generally a pretty good Cafe team, and Parabellum's had some, they've done some stuff on Cafe, but as Parabellum has never really been a top team, well, it's hard to call them one of the best Cafe teams, but they've had their moments. And yeah, it felt like even-ish. Maybe if Hyper was still here and he had played better in the first game, I might have more easily gone with Dark Zero. I did end up going with Parabellum. The game was fairly close. I think Dark Zero had a decent lead. Parabellum almost made the comeback, but not quite. And so yeah, not quite a nail in the coffin for Parabellum, but if they looked like perhaps one of the best, if not just the best team in the first week, I mean, obviously they're not that at this point. So Dark Zero getting off to a good start to the stage first 2 weeks, though, which we'll see in the standings later on. Sky is the top rated player, and Canadian doing well as well. Canadian stats are actually pretty good for the most part. Obviously the last game wasn't good, but he's higher rated than he generally is, and a lot of his impact is not seen on the scoreboard, but still, you know, if he has a great impact on the scoreboard and not on the scoreboard, it's obviously fantastic. And then Pamba and Eclipse doing pretty well as well. NJR kind of struggling here, but they still get the full 3 points. Asian, the top performer for Parabellum, and then Blaz, Kool-Aid Doc. Nobody doing especially bad except for maybe Eska going 5 and 9. So yeah, Parabellum, I don't know, maybe limited map pool, maybe they're just, you know, a team that gets off to a good start a lot of the time and then they sort of fall off. Whatever the case, we'll have to see what their deal is exactly going forward. I do think they have the potential, but well, again, we'll have to see. Let's move on to second game, Astralis versus Beast Coast. So definitely a very concerning game in a lot of regards. Beast Coast looked pretty strong on attack, and I think some people might even argue that that was just Astralis looking weak on defense, but as soon as Beast Coast went on to defense, they just fell apart, and Astralis woke up. Going into like round 6 or something, or after 5 rounds, I want to say, there were like 3 players on Astralis that had no kills. I think it was Shuttle, DP, and J9O, or maybe it was after several rounds, they had no kills, which is just terrible. But as I mentioned earlier, Forest goes gargantuan in this game. We'll see the stats in a moment. But yeah, we play on Villa. Astralis probably shouldn't be dropping any points to Beast Coast, but we'll see how Beast Coast does going forward. Maybe this is more Beast Coast playing decently than it is Astralis playing awfully, but again, with multiple players being on a donut for that many rounds, it is kind of concerning. Okay, so looking at these stats, yeah, 1.86 rating. That's one of the highest ratings we've ever seen in the NAL. 7-0 on entry. Is this just the best entry stat we've ever seen in a best of one? Like, how does he do this? The guy played blitz blitz more than any other attacker. 86% cost, 43% survival. Yeah, just 22 kills, 1.57 KPR. That's all you really need to know. Forrest might be the Villa GOAT after doing this to Beast Coast and doing what he did against TSM in stage 1. I don't think it was last stage, I think it was stage 1. And then J9O, DP Fire, even Shuttle, they sort of salvaged their kill deaths by the end. Obviously going almost double negative isn't great, but -1, and J9O died a lot. I don't think he generally does that too much, but his cost is quite high. At least he must have been getting traded or something, baited by Forrest, whatever the case. But okay, on Beast Coast, Surf, Zeno, Slash all putting up decent scores, and then Mark and Anthony struggling once again. So again, we'll see if this is like a good sign for Beast Coast, if it's just a bad sign for Astralis. There has been word that Furta might be in next week, so maybe we'll finally get to see the real Beast Coast, but also give them a little bit break when Furta first comes in, because that's going to be almost like their debut, like the way you expect new teams to play in week 1, they will be playing in week 3. Okay, so do keep that sort of thing in mind. Let's go to the next game. Sonics versus TSM. This was like the 2 top teams coming into the day, and this puts them both still at the top. Sonics should have had a very, very big lead, but now they're at 9 points along with TSM, and TSM has the head-to-head, but round differential is much more important than it is just straight up more important than head-to-head is at this point. But yeah, TSM kind of smoked them, and I mean, maybe TSM's just hot on bank, maybe Sonics are just not hot on bank, but I mean, you can't really argue with the 7-3. Taking a look at the stats, everybody's struggling. Grixer, 2 of his kills were from like suicides in fire by TSM, or I don't know if that's exactly how you'd call it, but they died in fire, and Grixer, he made a little bit of a comeback, and he was like 0 and something. He was like 1 and something, 0 and something after a bunch of rounds, and then he sort of came back towards the end of the game. But I mean, just look at the entry, like 1 entry kill coming out from Sonics over the course of 10 rounds. And yeah, so here's another good game coming out from Bolo. Massive bounce back from his performance last week. 13 kills for him, 13 for Merc. Good game for Achieved. Snake and Gasher, a little bit not so good, but you know, I mean, they crushed the enemy team. I can't imagine they care that much about it. And yeah, I mean, if you're shutting down Grixer, you're probably winning, because I mean, not that Grixer is like the hard carry for Sonics, but I think most people would agree that Grixer is one of the best, if not just the best player in the world, and probably almost certainly, and you'd say the best player in North America. So yeah, good on TSM, and we'll see if they can continue to be this dominant. Obviously, they did take that loss to Astralis, but if they continue to look this strong, like as strong as they looked in this game and the other 2 games, then well, somebody else is going to have to go on a pretty good run as well to challenge them for first place. And moving on, we have Xset versus Oxygen. So always a good matchup to see. Another very decisive game. So Xset went from losing 2-7 to Sonics to winning 7-2 versus Oxygen. And this is probably the nail in the coffin for Oxygen as far as going to the major goes. I said it before, only 1 point in 4 days is probably not going to cut it. Even if you get the full 15 points going forward, 16 points maybe will cut it. But that assumes you never go to overtime or lose again. So yeah, just a good showing by Xset. Another theme park game. We've seen a decent number of these. And Spirits on top, DS, Kino, Gomez in the middle, and Yaga on the bottom. Again, you don't generally see that. Yaga struggling a little bit this stage, but his team's still doing decently. Still a good shot to go to the major. And then over on Oxygen, Dream on top, Sweater towards the top. This is usually not a good sign. The Habana and the Nomad being the 2 highest rated players. And then Newers, Foxay, and especially Vertical having a pretty poor game. Sweater said in a Twitch chat, I don't know, it might have been Drip's chat, whoever's chat it was, that they are switching up roles after this, and it seems necessary. I mean, maybe take Vertical away from the front line, put Sweater and Newers as the 2 entries. Maybe that's not exactly what they're doing, but it seems like the most logical choice. Obviously, Dream's going to stay in his role, and then maybe they'll maneuver things around with Sweater, Fox, and Vertical. We'll see. But okay, that does it for this game, and again, probably does it for Auction for this stage. As far as going to the major, they can still make top 4 for the season, for the NAL finals, but they're like neck and neck, I think, with Space Station and Sonics at this point. So Space Station versus Mirage, this is the last game. So final game number 10 for the week, game number 5 for playday number 4, 8-6 victory for Mirage. Ungodly comeback for Space Station. They were down 1-6, and then they won 7 rounds in a row. A little bit of redemption, I think, for what happened to them in Saudi Arabia. They had Dexter on the squad, and they lost after being up 6-1 against Liquid. Liquid won 7 rounds in a row, and now against Dexter, they sort of do the opposite. They come back from 1-6 deficit, win 7 in a row, And yeah, I think this does speak to Mirage still being pretty good. We finally see him on a non-theme park map. They should have won this 7-2, 7-3, 7-4, 7-5, but unfortunately they did not. Space Station just had nerves of steel. And yeah, Chalet was generally a really good map for the Sonics, and Yeti coming from the Sonics, still in his Sonics jersey here. Maybe it taught him a thing or two. And actually, let's look at the stats here. 5-0 on entry, so we saw Forest go 7-0, but 5-0 is obviously a monstrous performance in just one game as well, and 4-2 by Folt, so definitely Space Station winning on the entry. Everybody going negative here except for Benji. And then yeah, so good game from Foltz, and I do think a lot of his kills, like more than half of them, came in the first 7 rounds at, you know, they were down 1-6. So I think a lot of these kills are technically impactless. Like his rating is quite good, but I do keep in mind it might have been a little bit more the efforts of other players, particularly perhaps Yeti, that allowed for this comeback. Not to take anything away from Foltz, but I believe I did. I remember noticing that. And then Rampy and Bosco, okay stats. Hot and Cold kind of struggling here, but well, it is what it is. Hot and Cold just is not the absolute juggernaut he was last year, but he generally is one of the higher rated players on Space Station. Just not in this game. And then yeah, on Mirage, it's Dexter on top. Dexter really wanted to get his revenge against the Space Station, but not to be. And then nobody else going positive on the kills. So tough to come back this hard on if you're Mirage, and obviously just a miraculous W if you are a Space Station or a Space Station fan. So let's take a look at the stats. Here are the leaderboards. I'll run through the full stats in just a second. We have Grixer on top in terms of rating and KD, followed pretty closely by Merc and Forest in both categories. For entry, it is Forest on top. He's like 13-4, just an ungodly number for a player that's really not even an entry player. As far as cost goes, pretty tight between Gasher, Skies, Snake, Melted, but it is a couple of TSM players sort of dominating here. The hard support player being number 1, and Clutches, Snake also up here, but several players on 2, and then Bosco is currently the king of plants by a pretty significant margin, having 3 more than Geo and Dream, and even more than that, more than every other player. And we'll look at the full stats. Do notice there are 4 TSM players in the top 10. The top 10 goes all the way down to Foltz. Benji Mula just missing out on the top 10, and then we have a pretty good diversity. We have an Astralis player, we have a Dark Zero player, Parabellum, couple of Sonics players, and an SSG player. And I'll just scroll down here if you want to take a glance at anybody, and you can just see this on CGG for yourself, but after any other game is played, this will be updated and this will be outdated. So for posterity, here it is. And all right, so that's gonna do it. Let's go to the standings. And yeah, here they are, TSM and Sonics on top at 9 points, but pretty much every team is fairly close to them except for Oxygen and Beast Coast. Only 3 points separating the first place team from the 8th place team. And you know, that's not like terribly surprising. It's only been four games. Okay, so again, yeah, TSM and Sonics, the top 2 teams. TSM ahead of Sonics by round differential, but they also have the head-to-head. Dark Zero on 8 points, and then Space Station and Mirage tied on 7, but Space Station with the superior round differential and head-to-head over Mirage, and then Xset, Astralis, Parabellum, all of them on 6 points. So for the most part, it's still anybody's stage for going to the major, except for Oxygen and Beast Coast are almost certainly not going to be going. Maybe we'll see a bounce back by Beast Coast when Ferda comes in, which might be pretty soon. Maybe we'll see a bounce back by Oxygen as a result of role changes. Maybe we'll see a bounce back by Parabellum. They did really well in week 1 and then really poorly in week 2, so they'll need a bounce back to do well this stage. Could also see a bounce back by Astralis. They've sort of not been like struggling that hard. 6 points is still okay. You know, 3 points could put them up here with TSM and Sonics potentially, but as the top team in stage number 1 and stage number 2, maybe you expected a little bit better of a performance. Xset generally super consistent, but I guess they've played like kind of tough opponents so far. Well, they played against Sonics, and then who's the other loss? I'm blanking. They played against Parabellum, yeah, is their other loss, and that might end up coming back to bite them if Parabellum doesn't have that many wins at the end of the stage. Like if a team start beating them consistently, then a loss against them obviously sucks. And then we have Mirage looking pretty good. They could obviously be even higher if they hadn't sort of let the game slip against Space Station, but good on Space Station to get that and put themselves into the top 4 at the end of the second week. And then Dark Zero, even though they had to substitute one of their players, bring Skies back in, I should say. They're looking decent at the moment. Maybe holes will appear going forward, but for now it's working out okay for them. And then, yeah, once again, Sonics and TSM battling for the top, and it looks like TSM's probably the best team. with, maybe a weird loss to Astralis given their results in all their other games, but at least they didn't get like smoked. That was a closer game than Sonic's one loss, which was against TSM. So yeah, that's gonna do it for this video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, corrections, any of that stuff, feel free to leave it below. And liking the subscription would also be appreciated. With all of that being said, catch you guys in the next video.